and we will get going. So if somebody can give me a thumbs up that you can see the opening slide, good, okay. So today's virtual conversation is on the UDO neighborhood zoning district. So hopefully that's what you signed up for. We'll cover that today, but before we get into it, just to go over what the format of our meeting will be, we have some slides to help understand the neighborhood zoning districts. And as we go through the slides, if comments or questions or any kind of feedback comes to mind that you want to jump in and share with us, please use the chat feature in Zoom to do that. And our staff and our consultants will do the best we can to try to keep up with your comments and questions in live time as we go. And then as we get toward the end of the presentation, we'll go back and we'll try to address any comments or questions that we have not been able to answer as they came in. So just before we get into it, just to get people kind of using the chat feature, what I'd like you to do now is to go in, open the chat feature, which should be on the bottom of your Zoom screen somewhere, and just tell us what your name is. And if you're here representing a firm, a neighborhood, an organization, or any other type of interest, you'd like to share that information with us, also put that in after your name, just so that we start to see who's here with us, and just so that you get familiar with using chat, although probably we're all familiar with how to use Zoom by now. But this gives us also just an idea, once we save the chat at the end of the meeting, just we can go back and we can easily see who was here when we started the meeting. So I see they're coming in now. Thank you for doing that. And as you're doing that, we're going to continue on with our slides. We only have an hour to spend today, so we need to get right into our program. So the purpose of our meeting today is to, one, understand the relationship between the neighborhood place types, which are in the comprehensive plan, and the neighborhood zoning districts, which we'll be talking about today. It also explain what happens to our current zoning districts, particularly our residential zoning districts. Go over some of the highlights of the new UDO neighborhood and neighborhood 1 rather, and neighborhood 2 zoning districts, and review some new proposed overlay districts that will be available. Before we get into the neighborhood zoning districts, wanted to go over just some background information. We maybe have some people here who haven't been with us before, may not know some of the background on the UDO. This is our current schedule. We released the first draft of the UDO in October. We're in the midst of receiving public comments and feedback on the first draft. We will be issuing subsequent drafts of the UDO in red lines so that people will be able to see any changes that have been made from one draft to the next. There will be a public hearing in May of this year at City Council. The Planning Committee will also review the draft that goes, and then we have a final draft that goes for adoption by City Council, or vote by City Council, we hope adoption, and that will happen in July of this upcoming year. So again, a little more background. What is the UDO and how is it connected to the adopted comprehensive plan? It is the implementation tool for implementing the adopted comprehensive plan and other city adopted policies. It updates and consolidates and joins together several land development regulations and ordinances that currently exist in various chapters of the city code. You can see them all listed on the right-hand side of this slide. The one that a lot of people are probably most familiar with is the zoning ordinance, but we also have the other ordinances that you see in the city code there, and they all of those will be updated as needed and consolidated and combined into one unified development ordinance. So I want to spend a little time just to go over and to try to help people understand what the difference is between the policy versus the regulation, because this seems to trip up some people. So this is one way that we can maybe help explain it a little bit better. On the left-hand side of our slide, we've got adopted policy language, beginning at the highest level with the comprehensive plan. It's visionary. It sets a vision for the city. On the right-hand side, we've got the Unified Development Ordinance, which is a legal document. It's the law of the land. So the comprehensive plan talks about policies and visions. The UDO talks about rules and regulations. That's a simple way to explain it. So out of the comprehensive plan, we have a variety, a menu of place types. And these can be thought of, they're not a land use map, but they kind of are a land use map with additional policy guidance, as well as, you know, what a place should be, but also how it should look, what should be, you know, various aspects of the place. What's the transportation network like? What's the built environment supposed to look like in that place type? And then we have zoning districts that will align with those particular place types to make sure that development in those place types achieves that vision. So at the bottom of this slide, you can see on the left, here is an example that we've chosen to help illustrate this. We've chosen the innovation mixed use place type, which is a new place type in the comprehensive plan. And that says, among other things, that newer office, residential, and mixed use buildings typically have heights up to 6 stories in this place type. So you can see the kind of language that's in there, typically have heights. That's policy language, that's vision, that's kind of setting out our expectations for that place type. How that translates into the UDO, into the regulations are, we have an innovation mixed use zoning district, which is different than the innovation mixed use place type. The place type says typically have heights up to 6 stories. The zoning district and the UDO actually sets the rules to make sure that we achieve that. So we have a minimum building height of 24 feet and a maximum building height of 80 feet, which is the equivalent roughly of a 6-story building. So our zoning regulations help us achieve the vision in the comprehensive plan. Here's another way to help illustrate the difference. On the left-hand map, we have what is currently in our draft policy map, which is the process that we're going through now to map out the new place types across the city. This just happens to be one small geography that I selected. You can see the circle in the middle is actually the intersection of Monroe Road and Wendover Road. And you can see labeled on that map some of the new comprehensive plan place types. We have neighborhoods 1 and 2, which we'll be talking about today. We have that innovation mixed use place type, which is right in the middle of the map that we just talked about. We've got activity centers, a community activity center, and a neighborhood activity center. We have a commercial place type that's mapped in this area. We also have a couple of others, the manufacturing and logistics, and a parks and preserves place type down toward the bottom of the map. So there are 10 separate place types being mapped now that came out of the comprehensive plan. On the right-hand side is an excerpt from our current zoning map for that same area. So we currently have in our zoning ordinance 41 conventional zoning districts. We're proposing 28 new zoning districts in the UDO that will replace these 41 zoning districts. But as you can see from the zoning map, it does not line up exactly with the place type map. So zoning and place types are different. They're related, but they're different. So why are we developing the UDO? Well, as I mentioned, it's going to be the primary regulatory tool for implementing the comp plan, but it's also to create more predictability, we think, in future development. It's to try to align all of those various zoning and land development regulations that you saw on a slide a couple of slides ago, so that they work better together. There's common language and common definitions across all of those various regulations. Consolidating them and updating them as needed. Some of those regulations probably hadn't been updated in a few years, so we're trying to get them current with what's currently best practice. We think that the UDO will be more user-friendly than our current regulations are through simplifying terms, increasing the use of graphics and tables and so forth. And finally, to make sure that we stay in compliance with North Carolina 160D, which is a legislation governing planning across the state of North Carolina. So the UDO is broken up into several areas. We have an introductory provision. We've got a zoning section. We've got another section on subdivision streets and other infrastructure. Stormwater and natural resources is another area. And finally, administration, nonconformities, and enforcement. So when you go into the UDO, which is available on our website, and we'll talk about that toward the end of the presentation, you'll see a table of contents. The UDO has 40 different articles. They're like chapters, if you will. The zoning districts for the neighborhood zoning districts are in part 3. We have 13 parts, by the way. I forgot to mention the parts. 13 parts, 40 articles. Each part has at least one article in it. So part 3 is our neighborhood zoning districts, and it contains Article 4 and Article 5. Article 4 is all of our neighborhood 1 zoning districts corresponding to the neighborhood 1 place type. And Article 5 is our neighborhood 2 zoning districts, which obviously corresponds to the neighborhood 2 place types. So again, for each of those 2 neighborhood place types, here are the various zoning districts that we're proposing to use. For the neighborhood 1, we have 6 new zoning districts, N1A, B, C, D, E, and F. They are, for the most part, comparable to the existing single-family residential districts that we have now, with the exception of N1F, which we won't spend a lot of time on today. It's kind of a new concept for us, but the N1A is comparable to our current R3 district, N1B comparable to R4, and so on. And then we have 3 new zoning districts for the neighborhood 2 place types, N2A, N2B, and N2C, and we'll talk a little bit about those as we go. So what happens to all of our current zoning districts? And I want to specify our current conventional zoning districts. We're not talking about conditional districts or optional districts. We're talking about conventional zoning districts. What happens to those when the UDO is adopted? Well, all of them will, all 41 of those current zoning districts will translate to one of the new UDO districts. So I've highlighted, and you can find this translation table in the UDO in Article 3. But I've highlighted the districts that we're talking about today. So you can see, for example, that the R3 conventional zoning district today will translate to the N1A and the R4 to the N1B and so forth. So for the most part, our single family districts today will translate to one of our neighborhood 1 districts. Our multifamily districts today will generally translate to one of our neighborhood 2 districts. And then our UR districts, which stands for urban residential, the UR1 will translate to the neighborhood 1E district, but the others will translate to a neighborhood 2 district. So we'll start out by talking about our neighborhood 1 districts, and I'm mostly going to focus on neighborhood 1A through E. Neighborhood 1, N1F is probably not going to be mapped. There's nothing today that will translate to the N1F. It allows, well, let me not get ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. The N1A through the N1E zoning districts will allow single family dwellings, duplexes, and triplexes on all lots, and quadruplexes on arterial streets, but only when an affordable housing unit is provided as one of the 4 units in the quadruplex. The N1F zoning district will allow all of those as well as small-scale townhomes and multifamily dwellings. The neighborhood 1 zoning will also allow for select non-residential uses such as places of worship, educational facilities, and if there are existing neighborhood commercial establishments, a so-called corner store, it would allow for the reuse of those with certain prescribed conditions. So here are some highlights of those N1 districts. As I just mentioned, will allow all of those single-family duplex and triplex on any lot, quadruplexes on an arterial street. We're not regulating residential density the way we do today by dwelling units per acre, or DUA. Instead, density will be regulated primarily by minimum lot sizes. So we do have minimum lot sizes in the new zoning districts. They will vary by district, but they're the same minimum lot size for all dwelling types. So regardless of whether the new development is a single family or a triplex, the minimum lot size will be the same, as will the front, side, and rear setbacks. We have a maximum height requirement for duplexes and triplexes in established neighborhoods, and that's based on the height of nearby dwellings. We are allowing ADUs, accessory dwelling units, on all lots that have a single family dwelling on it. We will only allow one driveway per street frontage per lot, regardless of whether it's a single family house, a duplex, or a triplex. And for duplexes, triplexes, and quadruplexes, parking will be to the side or to the rear of the dwelling and not in the front yard. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we have new overlay districts that are available that we'll cover in a few minutes. So I've said that our current single family districts will translate to one of our neighborhood 1 districts. And aside from a couple of exceptions, such as permitting duplexes and triplexes on any lot, the development standards for the new districts will look very familiar to the development standards that you have today in the R3, R4, and so forth districts. So I just use this slide as an example. It's not always easy to get an apples to apples comparison, but for some requirements it is. So for example, maximum density in that first column today in R3, you can build 3 units per acre. In the corresponding N1A district in the UDO, we don't have that kind of density requirement. The second line down though, take a look at that, the minimum lot area, which is something that we do have today and we will continue to have in the UDO. You can see that they are very similar for the most part. The 10,000 to 10,000 square foot for the first set of comparable districts, 8,000, 6,000, and so forth. Minimum lot widths are the same for most districts to the district that they will translate to, as our front setbacks and rear yards are also very similar. So you won't see an awful lot of difference aside from those key use differences that I mentioned. But as far as the actual development standards for those districts, they will look very much like they do today. I mentioned that there is a special height requirement for duplexes and triplexes in the neighborhood 1 zoning districts, and it has to do with a maximum sidewall height. And you can see on the diagram how that's measured. It's measured from the grade up to the eave. And the way it works is that you're allowed, if you build a duplex or a triplex in one of these neighborhood zoning districts, neighborhood 1 districts, you can, that sidewall can be either 12 feet or the average sidewall height of the dwellings on either side of that dwelling, that new dwelling, whichever is greater. So this doesn't necessarily limit your sidewall height to 12 feet. It could be greater if the houses on either side are greater. So what the intention of this is to, for example, if there is a neighborhood of single family 1-story houses, and their chances are their sidewalls are probably not greater than 12 feet. what this would mean is that if you wanted to build a duplex or a triplex in that area, you would look at the height of the sidewall height of the house on either side of you. And if they're one-story houses, then chances are your duplex or triplex is going to be limited to a 12-foot sidewall height. If you're building a infill building in a neighborhood of 2 or 3-story houses, then you would be able to exceed that 12 feet. You would just average the sidewall height of those houses on either side of you. Regardless of that, you can still build that structure to the maximum height allowed in that district through a 45-degree height plan. So you're not limited to just building a 12-foot tall house, but that is your sidewall height. And then you've got to start pitching in that roof line until you get to that maximum height. So that's a little technical, but hopefully the diagram and the language in the UDO will help explain that a little bit better than I maybe just did. And we can take questions on that as we go. And I apologize, I am focused on the slides and not really looking at the chat. So we'll get back to that after I finish. So want to talk about a couple of alternative development options that are available in the neighborhood 1 zoning districts. We have a conservation residential development, which is Article 4.5A, and a voluntary mixed income bonus option, which is 4.5B. These are similar to things that we have today. So what the conservation residential development works to help try to protect existing natural resources. It may be a pond or a lake or a wooded area, by allowing you to reduce the lot size in exchange for additional open space. At least half of that additional open space has to be tree save. So in order to do something like this, a conservation residential development, it would be permitted in the N1A, B, C, or D zoning districts. Your site has got to be at least 10 acres. And as I said, that would allow you the option of reducing the minimum lot size for your dwellings by providing additional open space and then preserving those natural features that we're trying to conserve. The mixed income residential development is also available in those zoning districts. And the way this works is that under this, you would be allowed to develop under the standards of the next most intense district. So in other words, you'd be able to get more dwellings onto the site by using this option. So if your zoning district is N1A, you could develop under the N1B standards. If your zoning is N1B, you could develop under the N1C standards and so forth. And the upshoot of that is that you're basically allowed to have smaller minimum lot sizes and you can get more units onto your development site. But 50% of the additional units that you're allowed to build under this option would have to be set aside for affordable housing, households earning 80% of area median income, and you'd have to provide at least 2 affordable units as part of this type of development. I mentioned that we've got some new overlay districts that are available in the neighborhood 1 zoning districts. These are available in N1A, B, C, D, and E, and there are 3 of them. And I'll talk in more detail about each of these, but they are all found in Article 14, not in Article 4, which is the neighborhood zoning districts. These overlay districts are in Article 14 of the UDO, and you can see what they are: the neighborhood character overlay, a residential infill overlay, and the cottage court overlay. So the neighborhood character overlay district is something that we've gotten a lot of interest on when we've talked to people in the community. So I'd like to go over that in some detail and hopefully answer some questions that have come up with that. So the purpose of the neighborhood character overlay is to preserve an existing character of a neighborhood and to foster compatible new development within the neighborhood. It can be applied, as I said, in any of those 5 N1 zoning districts. And once you establish the district, all new residential construction, and that includes new buildings and also additions and expansions, would have to comply with the standards that are established in the neighborhood character plan. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So to be eligible for a neighborhood character overlay district, you've got to meet certain criteria. For one, there has to be some characteristics that we're trying to preserve, and they could include a consistency in scale, proportion, or rhythm. And what we mean by that is things like lot width, building height, ground floor elevation, massing, setbacks, something that is common to that district that you want to preserve, or similarly, other on-site elements such as parking, landscaping, or tree save areas. So we've got to figure out what is unique about that neighborhood that we are trying to preserve through this neighborhood character overlay district. So in addition to that, the size of the district has to be at least one block face long. So it can't just be 2 or 3 lots, and it's got to be at least a block. The general development pattern of the district that's selected and mapped has to have been in place for at least 25 years. So something that was built 5 years ago would not be eligible for this. At least 75% of the lots in the proposed overlay district have got to be developed, and we can't use this overlay district in addition to an existing historic overlay district. So here are some of the standards that can be regulated and modified through the use of the neighborhood character overlay. We can talk about lot area. We can change that from what the lot area requirements would be in the underlying zoning. Same for lot width, setbacks, the maximum height or the maximum building coverage, the location and size of parking, and any enhanced tree planting standards. So as I mentioned earlier, these are only applicable to residential development, either new residential or additions or expansions. Non-residential development, such as churches or schools or things like that, that might be allowed, would not be subject to the standards of the neighborhood character overlay. And then for uses, the uses allowed in the underlying zoning district would be allowed in the neighborhood character overlay. So the question that has come up a couple of times is, can we use a neighborhood character overlay district to keep out duplexes and triplexes? And the simple answer to that is no. Those are permitted uses and they can't be changed by this overlay district. Only the development standards can be modified, and those are the things that we've just covered. So here's the process for initiating and getting a neighborhood character overlay district approved. First, the neighborhood has to initiate a request to develop a neighborhood character plan, and they submit that to the planning department, and we make a determination as to whether this neighborhood or area that's proposed is eligible. We have a public meeting at that point to discuss the eligibility of the neighborhood. Then we develop the neighborhood character plan. That will be done by the planning department in conjunction with the neighborhood. There will be a public informational meeting to reveal the contents and the what is included in the neighborhood character plan. At that point, there would be a petition for a map amendment, essentially an overlay district amendment that would go through the adoption process and would go ultimately to the city council for adoption, similar to the way a rezoning would work. There are several details. I'm glancing at the questions that are coming into chat about the specifics of that. You can find those in the in Article 14. There's obviously more detail in the UDO. Just for time's sake, I don't think we've got the time to really go into the details of that, but if we have time later, maybe we can talk about that. So I want to move on from the neighborhood character overlay district to the next overlay, which is the residential infill overlay district. And this is intended to ensure that infill residential development fits the pattern and scale of the existing neighborhood. This is, I apologize, this slide should have been modified. The third bullet says it must be located within Route 4. We have taken that requirement out, so ignore that one. But you have to have at least 50 contiguous lots to establish the residential infill overlay district. This can be initiated by either a majority vote of the city council or by 60% of property owners within the proposed overlay district. And we can use this in any N1A through N1E district. And this diagram will look familiar to you because it's the same diagram that we are using for our duplex and triplex maximum sidewall height. So in a residential infill overlay district, again, you would be limited to, for infill, for new residential buildings, to these sidewall requirements. So either 12 feet maximum or the average of the buildings on either side of you. And what this is intended to do, again, is to prevent taller infill buildings being built in a neighborhood of, say, one-story single-family homes. There is also another provision that can be included in this, and it limits the unit size of new residential development to either the average square footage of the single-family structures on the block face and the block face across the street, or to 800 square feet per unit in the proposed building, whichever is greater. Again, there's more details to be able to find in the actual UDO. And then finally, the last overlay district is the Cottage Court overlay district. This could be applied in N1A through N1F districts. You could build either single family duplex or triplex dwellings in this Cottage Court overlay. You have to have at least 4 buildings. You can reduce the lot size that would be required by the underlying zoning district by 50%. The individual lots don't have to meet those minimum lot sizes. But the way the Cottage Court works is that the dwellings have to either front on a public street or around a centrally located common open space. You can see in the example photo there of a very nice Cottage Court type of development around a common open space. And there is a small unit bonus so that you can get more units if you build units that are 800 square feet or less. So smaller units, if you build small units, which theoretically would be more affordable, you can increase the density. And this is also approved as an overlay district, would go through that kind of rezoning process as well. We've gotten questions about tiny homes and are tiny homes allowed? And yes, tiny homes are allowed in generally any zoning district that would allow single family dwellings, as long as the tiny home met the building code requirements. But if someone were to want to build a tiny home neighborhood, for example, this Cottage Court overlay district might be a good thing to try to investigate doing that. But it is not necessary to do that to build a tiny home. So I want to move into the neighborhood 2 districts because, again, we've got a short amount of time and it seems like a lot of questions to get through. So neighborhood 2 districts will correspond to the neighborhood 2 place types that are being mapped through the policy mapping process. And neighborhood 2 is more a mix of moderate to high intensity residential development, or is a transition between less intense residential development and higher intensity mixed use centers. So in a neighborhood 2 district, you can have multifamily dwellings, townhouses, and also some of the other dwelling types that are allowed in the neighborhood 1 district, such as single family duplex, triplexes, or quads. You can have those in the N2A district or as components of a multi-dwelling development in the N2B district. I know that's a lot of words, so we can try to clarify if you've got questions about what all that means. And like the neighborhood 1 zoning districts, in neighborhood 2, you can also have certain non-residential uses such as religious institutions, educational facilities, and neighborhood commercial establishments. A few more highlights of the neighborhood 2 districts. We have, in addition to the types of dwellings that are allowed, we have a requirement for maximum building lengths. So that is generally 400 feet across all 3 of these districts. For townhomes and multifamily attached, those will be limited to 8 units per building, or 6 if you're adjacent to a neighborhood 1 place type, but generally 8 units to a building. There will also be some building design requirements, and they'll have requirements for things like building articulation, minimum ground floor height, transparency requirements, and entrances. In the N2C district, which is the highest intensity of the 3 N2 districts, there will be build to zones, and also development bonuses. Some of you may be familiar with development bonuses, which we're currently using in our TOD districts. We're expanding that development bonus concept to several of the other zoning districts in the UDO. Not going to spend a lot of time going into that now. And then finally, we do have an open space requirement for the neighborhood 2 zoning districts. And it's generally 10% of the lot area for multifamily stacked development, or for townhomes or multifamily attached, it's based on the unit. So 250 square feet in N2A per unit, or 150 square feet for townhomes in N2B or N2C. So that was a lot to cover on the N1 and N2 zoning districts. Finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about short-term hold dwelling rentals, because it's been in the news recently and it's gotten some attention, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about it and tell you where we are. In the UDO, it is a use category. It's a commercial use category. It's called short-term hold dwelling rental. You may know it as Airbnb or Verbo. There may be others, but this is typically what we're talking about. And it is a complete dwelling offered for rent for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. That's what the zoning definition of this use is. It would be permitted in all neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2 zoning districts with prescribed conditions. It would also be permitted in other higher intensity districts, but we're talking about neighborhood 1 and neighborhood 2 here. So some of those prescribed conditions that we're proposing are that it would require a zoning use permit. So we know where these are. There would be a separation requirement from other short-term rentals, as well as from other bed and breakfasts and rooming houses. Right now it's proposed to be 400 feet. There would need to be a local manager that's available 24/7, so that if something goes wrong, or we need to know what's going on with the short-term rental, there's a local person we can call and get on the scene if necessary. There is additional parking required. This is in addition to any parking that might be required. For example, if you have a single family home and you want to rent it out as a short-term rental, your single family home may have a parking requirement. This would be in addition to that, and it would be 1 parking space per bedroom. And the intent of that is so that guest parking doesn't overwhelm local neighborhood streets and other people's driveways. In addition, you can't use these for weddings, classes, receptions, other large events, and they can't be in a motor vehicle like an RV or a travel trailer or a camper. So I want to just review where we are now and what's coming up. As we released the first draft in October, we're currently in the midst of our community engagement process. We have had several in-person pop-up meetings and open house meetings. We're now in the midst of these virtual meetings. We will be accepting comments on the first draft of the UDO through January 14th. And our website is charlotteudo.org. That is the best place to start for your questions or comments on the UDO. We're in the midst of 10 virtual conversations. Today is the 5th. Each of these virtual conversations is on a specific area of the UDO or a topic, and you can see where they are. And the fact that you found us here probably means that you're familiar with this, that you've had to register. We'll be doing this same presentation at 6 p.m. tonight to accommodate people who maybe couldn't make it here at noon. And then we have one next week, next Tuesday, on UDO administration. And then we're going to take some time off for the holidays and come back after the new year. And we have 4 more in early January. The January 4th, I'll call specific attention to that. That's intended for frequent users of the UDO, typically designers, landscape architects, people who frequently use our land development ordinances. That is more of a Q&A for those frequent users, although anyone is welcome to attend. But if you register for that, we're asking that you give us your questions ahead of time so that we can prepare responses. And we probably won't be able to answer questions that just come up on the fly at that meeting. We're going to focus on the questions that we get ahead of time so that we make sure that we give the proper answer. So if you haven't registered for any of those 5 upcoming and you see a topic there that interests you, please go to our website and sign up and register, and you'll get the Zoom link for those meetings. So I mentioned our website. This is the place to go to not only look at the UDO and read it, but also to provide your feedback and comments. So when you go to our homepage, you'll see that big orange box, and you click on that, and it will take you to another page where you can either download the full UDO, all 608 pages of it, or you can take it in smaller bites. If you're only interested in the zoning districts and standards, you can open that up as a separate PDF. And those are also the areas you go to make your comments. If the 608 page full UDO is a bit much for you to swallow, we have created a 26 page reference guide, which walks through all of the articles of the UDO and just gives you some of the basics of what's included in each of these articles. So that's a good place to start. If you don't want to get into all of the details of the UDO, you can also find this on our website. On the main page up at the menu bar, you'll see a tab for helpful resources. It's a drop down, and the first thing you'll find on the drop down is the reference guide. So that's where you will find that. So I am going to end the slides there and try to catch up with chat, and I'm going to open it up to my colleagues from staff and Camiros to jump in and see if there are questions or discussion that we need to have. Thank you. Laura, Marissa, Chris, yeah, where are we with in terms of catching up with comments? You know,
we've got a lot of them, but we still have a few. Could you maybe go up to the beginning of the comments and we can just walk through them?
Sure.
And there may be a few things that have fallen through the cracks that we need to address.
Okay. So why don't I share my screen with my comment. All right, Laura, can you see the comments?
I cannot, but that may be me.
No, it's just showing your desktop background, Ellen.
All right. then I'm not sure how to.
I think we could just walk through verbally the comments.
Yeah,
Sure.
I can, I've got where they kind of started. So I think between myself, Laura and Chris. Is that me or is somebody's?
I don't know. I was hearing kind of a little Darth Vader coming out of my microphone earlier.
So, okay. It seems I sound okay now. Okay. The first question we got referred was regarding the use of stories versus feet for building height. And just to clarify that the stories, when we talk about stories, that's really coming out of the place types and the comprehensive plan. When we will be talking about the UDO, as you look at the regulations, all of those are in feet. We don't use stories within the UDO. The next question, and I'll kind of turn this over to Laura, was regarding the place types mapping. We had a couple of those. I think we can maybe just address those that came up regarding the maps that show the different place types and how that process is going. I would actually turn that over to staff to address where that is and how that's working.
Yes, thank you, Arista. It can be rather confusing. I think the difference between the place type and a zoning district, but they are different. The place type, as Alan talked about, is the policy, the zoning district are the regulations. So the policy map, the place, also known as the place type map, is first draft has been completed with comments, and that comment period has ended. Another draft will be available in mid-January. And really important that folks go look at that if they have an interest, because the application of the zoning districts will be based on the place type. So for most place types, we have multiple zoning districts, and one of those zoning districts would be applied for each property with a certain place type designation. So again, take a look at that. They are different. Zoning will regulate what happens on a property, not a place type. A place type will just give the guidance, the general guidance. Again, 10 place types, and how many zoning districts do we have, Alan? 28. So a big difference between those two.
Okay, I guess I'll just keep scrolling through the comments that we saw. There was a good catch in here regarding the quadruplex and the requirement that one of the units be affordable, and what would the time frame for that be. That's something we're going to go back and look at, because there's other affordable type provisions in the ordinance that do have time frames. Oh, I don't know what is happening. And so we will take a look at that. Next was a question, and I don't know, Chris, if yours is, if you're better. I don't know what's happening. I've never had this happen on mine before. Oh, it may be somebody's mic was on. Okay, the other was the question regarding that the sidewall height that's there, and the question, Kathleen brought it up, what if the adjacent lot is vacant? Again, another good catch. We do need to kind of look at that and see what happens in that situation and include a provision for that. Chris, I don't know if you want to take the question regarding residential density. I know you had answered that in there. Is that, or am I putting you on the spot?
No, that's fine. I'm trying to scroll up so that I can remember exactly what that question was, as there have been a lot of them.
Chris, it was at 1224, if that
Okay.
helps. From Faith Triggs regarding density.
Oh, okay. So, yep, the question, essentially, you know, with the lot area minimums, it might, you know, the math kind of works out that it looks like you could squeeze X number of units into a certain amount of land, which could be a little bit confusing given the fact that things have been regulated with density limits previously. But what we have to keep in mind is that it's actually a little bit more flexible the way that we've proposed it with lot area, but there are things that will serve to kind of control and mitigate the way that things are laid out and the ultimate densities that are achievable, things like setbacks, lot coverage standards, and those types of requirements that will serve to kind of mitigate where things can locate on a lot and actually how big the lots need to be to meet all of the other requirements. So, the math does look like that, but there are other controlling factors to take into account.
Okay, so Chris has taken that one. So there's another question. Again, it seems to be the place types and the zoning districts are getting a little bit mixed up. Essentially, there was a question here from K. Doyle George regarding if a developer complies with development standards for a place type, approval would then be in the discretion of the planning department. I think there needs to be a little bit of clarity that what would control what you can do on your lot is going to come from the zoning map. So the place types map is first, and then we use that to interpret and create a new zoning map that reflects the districts that are in the different place types. And so as we strive to create kind of more predictability, allowing people to understand what can happen on a lot, if you comply with the standards of your zoning district, yes, that development would take place by right on the parcel. But again, that comes out of the zoning districts and the zoning district map, not the place types maps. Place types inform the zoning map. Laura, this was something I was trying to get some clarity in a private chat. It's regarding the affordable housing manual, which applies to TOD right now. I know there's a number of other manuals that are part of it. I was just hoping either Laura or Alan can provide a little update on that.
Yeah, this would be, and we heard the comment from, I think, Dennis. We do need to get this manual done. It will be a pretty simple manual, but it will be how this is administered. And it is separate from the type of manual we have for the high bonus. This would be for the mixed income development. So we will be working on getting that out shortly, get it online so folks can see the draft.
Okay. And I'm still kind of in the old comments. There were some questions regarding where terms defined. Just to say, all definitions are located in Article 2 of the UDO. If we missed something, please let us know, and we'll make sure that we include a definition on that. Then there were a few comments that popped up regarding the neighborhood character overlay district. I believe, without having to read out the purpose statement and what you are allowed to modify within a neighborhood character plan, you can see that that's in the chat. That's also found within the special purpose district section of the UDO, essentially trying to maintain that character in terms of things like lot sizes, lot widths, location of parking. So it's really kind of controlling the scale and character of what's going in there, but not really getting into the architecture of the buildings at all. It is a process that can be initiated either by a neighborhood, there's a process for that, or through city council. It goes through a whole series of steps related to creating that neighborhood character plan, approving that neighborhood character plan, but the actual application of the NCO overlay district is through the rezoning process. It is a map amendment to the zoning map to apply that overlay to the designated area that would be within that NCO. So just to be very clear on that, it is a rezoning. It follows the map amendment procedures of the ordinance, including a hearing before city council. And somebody stop me if we did put a link in there. Kathy had asked regarding what is an arterial street. Where can you find what's considered an arterial street? If you guys want to go back through the chat, we did put a link to the project for the Charlotte street map, which is working on, designating those streets that are arterial.
Arista, I'm going to stop you. I'm not sure I saw a response to the question John Harvey asked at 12:25, which says current R8 provides the ability to have a 3-story quadruplex. The new N1D will max out at a 1-story triplex in neighborhoods. This will negatively impact R8 zoning ability to grow the way the current zoning ordinance does. You could have a quadruplex in N1D if the lot is on an arterial and one of the units is affordable. But in terms of the number of stories, the 3-story versus the 1-story, what the new zoning says is that in N1 zoning districts, if you build a duplex or a triplex in one of these zoning districts, that sidewall height diagram that we looked at would limit the sidewall height of your duplex or triplex to either 12 feet or the average of the sidewall height of the dwelling on either side of you. So that it may be true that if you're building a triplex in a neighborhood of 1-story houses, your sidewall height may be limited to 12 feet. But if you're putting that same triplex in a neighborhood of 2- or 3-story houses, you can, your sidewall height can be the average of the building heights around you, and you can still build to the maximum height of the district. So you can still build your 3 stories if the surrounding neighborhood is predominantly taller buildings. But if the surrounding neighborhood is predominantly 1 story, then you're going to be a little bit limited by how tall that can be based on the sidewall height. So it's
Just
not
a-
necessarily maxing out at a 1 story.
If I could add a further clarification there too, Alan, that limitation is just at the minimum setback. So you can actually achieve greater heights if you set back further from the minimum setback. So you can actually, you know, even if all of your neighbors were 1 story, you could still achieve a 3-story building if you increase the setbacks to gain that additional height.
Thank you, Chris. I missed that.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there was a lot here regarding NCO, and I did paste large blocks of text in there. So the
Yeah.
minimum lot area for townhomes is 3,000. This is a question from Eddie Moore. Is this the underlying lot size or the sublot size? So townhomes, we've specifically defined them as being on sublots to make that distinction. So that would be the sublot size. Unless I'm wrong. Chris, am I wrong? I don't think I'm wrong.
I'm sorry, I was reading something and I didn't hear your.
No, that because the minimum lot area for townhomes is 3,000 square feet. Townhomes are defined as specifically being on sublots. That would be the sublot size.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I think my understanding is that it's the lot area minimum, not the sublot, the way that we've set it up.
Oh, yes, correct.
Yeah.
There were also a number of questions coming in regarding short-term rentals, existing Airbnbs, and a question here regarding the movie TV industry. I saw that Kevin had answered some of that. I don't know if Kevin, if there's anything that you'd like to add or summarize regarding the Airbnb situation.
Sorry, I was desperately looking for my mute. And forgive me, I'm a bit under the weather, as I'm sure some of you can tell by my voice. I would just say, I was just in the midst of getting ready to answer another one of Doyle's questions. I think the issue, the topic of STRs is something that has really, in my perspective, gratefully generated a lot of conversation, feedback, comments on. And I would say with the current proposed language that all of it will be looked at again based on all the feedback that we've received, including how current STRs are treated going forward, what the separation requirements are, if any. So all of that is under consideration. Again, recognize everybody that this is a draft document. It's not perfect. That's why we're having these conversations with you, so we can gather feedback and really, with your input, put forward what benefits both the city and the community as well. Reference the one question I was getting ready to answer back to George, Doyle George. With respect, I can't speak to whether the city has tried to have any negotiated agreements with the providers and the city. It's beyond my station. We're coming at this from a zoning use perspective, and that's why you see what you see. It's just, they may have taken place, they may not have. I just don't know because it's not something that I would be privy to. But I would say for everybody on the call that's got comments and questions and considerations that should be taken into account for SDRs going forward, please input those into the public comment portal. Please, it's very important that we receive those because this is just our first crack at these, but we want to make them where they work in our community, and that's where we need your help. So that's all I have, Arista. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for your response. And I'm going to be the timekeeper. It's 5 after 1, and this meeting is scheduled to end at 1 o'clock. So we're going to ask that if you still have feedback, please enter your comments, questions on our website. And I showed you how to get there. Again, if you want to see this again, we'll be doing the same presentation at 6 o'clock this evening. If you want to come back because maybe you've got more questions that you'd like to ask us, but we're going to wrap up the meeting. And I thank you all on behalf of the UDO team and our consultants for your interest and for coming to this virtual conversation.